I'm Justin. This is our founder and CEO of Anaya, David Young, and I will kick it over to him. We're excited. There's been good interest in the topic of managing high performance teams, and we work with a lot of them on a day-to-day basis. So, David, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Yeah, we wanted to do just a webinar on just how to build teams and really less how to build teams and more just how to think about teams. And this, I think, is really relevant for whether you're young in your commercial real estate brokerage career and you're either on a team or you were brought in by a single broker and you're sort of found yourself on a team, or whether you're at that place in your career where you're trying to build a team. Just wanted to give our insights into what we see now. I always joke I was a commercial real estate broker for quite a long time, and I now deal with more brokers than I ever did when I was a broker as the founder of Anaya. And so some of these things are best practices we've seen. Some of these things are oriented around sort of the pitfalls of teams, and some of them are just about the business in general, which make building a team a little unique and challenging. But I think to kind of start with what I think is the basic building blocks of this business, team dynamic in this business. Sometimes you're either on a really dedicated team where there's a lot of trust, and it's the three, four, five of us that are all in really good communication, and we are, sort of everybody knows what everybody's doing. The vast majority of teams in this business, it's a little looser than that, though. It's, just by definition, the commission only nature of this business means you don't want to sort of over dilute transactions, put too many people on a transaction. And what I always say that I think makes this business really complicated is that, let's say you have a team of seven, and that team makes, $20 million a year, just like an enormously high producing team. But one person on that team doesn't make any money. And this is a very common occurrence, as many people know. That person's not happy. That person has a hard time celebrating the team. And so some of these things are just really nuanced to this business. Most other industries, when you're on a team of some sort, as the team performs, everybody's somewhat incentivized. Everybody's sharing in the and participating in the growth. That's not always the case in this business. In many ways, it's why we've built Anaya the way we have, with some of the permissioning, which we can get into. So just to kind of give sort of the lay of the land here, we'll spend, the beginning of this just talking about the complexity of building brokerage teams. We'll talk about some best practices of what we've seen, but less the things to do, more of just how to think about things as you evaluate your own team, whether you're thinking about building a team. We'll talk about team management in Anaya, and then as just sort of a bonus kicker, we'll show you some of the stuff we're working on as we speak. It's actually less relevant to teams, but this is going back to the beginning of what the title of this was. Is it's really focused on occupier rep teams, how to build really dynamic teams that are both good on the business development front as well as the transaction management front. Because as everybody knows who's been in this business for very long, there's kind of two workflows in this business, and the business development is by far the most important piece. But eventually, you're the dog that caught the car, and you have to actually service it. And so, it's not worth celebrating too early, just when you got the meeting or just when you sign the exclusive. As everybody who's been doing this for a long time knows, you're sort of at the, really the, call it 50 to 60 yard line just when you've gotten the exclusive. And so we will show you some of the stuff we're doing. That's sort of taking up our development resources at the moment. And so the more I've thought about teams in this business, and just for context, I started my commercial real estate brokerage at a small boutique company. I then went to CBRE, where I was at a really large company where in some ways it was just sort of same game, different jersey. I thought I was going to this sort of, the Goldman Sachs of corporate real estate, and much of it was the same. And a lot of the challenges with people that I worked with, my teammates, my partners, were really no different. And so I think what we're trying to do here is convey what are the things that are somewhat universal within this industry. And so, the basic building blocks of building a team, when we just think about first principles of this business, is that we're paid on commission. And by definition, just by being paid on commission, every transaction is somewhat of a zero-sum game. And so it's very rare. They happen, but it's quite rare when you see teams of, five or more where everybody's sort of participating in very set splits every single time. It that doesn't happen that much. When it does happen, I think it works out really well, but it also creates challenges around growth and whether you have hit a glass ceiling sometimes within your place on the team. And so I think it is really worth just kind of pointing out, though, that that is the sort of end all be all of what makes building these teams very challenging. Um, there's no shortage of teams where there's people moving, coming and going, and people getting frustrated with their team or their partner, and then they disband. And then what happens? And what am I taking with me? What deals are going with somebody else? And so fundamentally, everything is rooted in the fact that you don't want to over dilute transactions. You want the right people on on the team, and on the transaction. And so again, teams are really dynamic, and I think that that's something that people just think you assemble five or six brokers, and then we're all just going to communicate. And we'll get more into some of the sort of bad qualities of bad juniors and bad seniors in a second. But really, at the heart of it, what I've seen, especially now in the role that I sit in, is it's really about whether we are on a high trust team or a low trust team. And what I've seen and I'm pretty convinced of at this point, neither are bad. You kind of want to say, oh, we want to be a high trust team. I think being honest with, are we it's not either or. It's somewhat of a scale, whether we're a high trust or a low trust team. And if we're a high trust team, that means everybody's knowing what everybody's working on. Everybody's sort of got full insight into everything. And there's very rarely disputes. And then the reality is most teams are somewhat in between. A low trust team is we really don't trust each other that much. Everybody's kind of going in their own separate ways. But we call ourselves a team because maybe we share the base minimum or the bare minimum of information, of maybe like prospecting information or something like that. But I don't want, Danny knowing about the transaction that I'm working on with Bill, and I don't want Lisa knowing about what I'm working on with, somebody else. And most teams sit somewhere in between that. It's not either fully high trust or fully low trust. It's very in between. And I think being honest about what is the dynamic of this team really sets the stage for the habits and the way to sort of grow the pie because I've seen really low trust teams become some of the biggest teams that there are in the country. And we've talked with some of those team leaders who are some of our users of the product that, look, we're a low trust team. And so we're just trying to sort of conquer as much as we can, have as much market share as we can. But it's a little bit of to each their own. And, there's a lot of disputes on those types of teams. There's a lot of negotiation once the deal closes of, hey, what should the splits really be on this? And there's always some friction. This is a common occurrence within this business. I almost think you have to accept it. It's not something that, maybe many people are cut out for, but it is a part of the business. And I think, to grow in that comfortability of being in an industry that is somewhat of a low trust industry, I think is something you have to accept in many ways. And so I think that the keys to what we've seen, and I was actually speaking with a really, really large team leader of a 20-person team in New York the other day. And what he said was, we basically do an annual meeting every year, and we set a 12-month horizon of what are the roles of every single person. And some people are going to be more in the business development role. Some people are going to be more in the sort of transaction service role. And some people are going to be purely in what we call high stakes business development, which is you're that vice chairman, you're that really senior person, you're in the country clubs. You can get meetings that, are a phone call away as opposed to a cold call away. And so really knowing what everybody's role is and knowing how to pass off opportunities is really the key. And I think I started in this business almost 20 years ago, and I've just watched how teams have evolved, even in my own career, where it used to be that teams of two or three were almost about as large as teams really became. Now you do see enormous teams. I mean, I actually know of one team is 45 people. Some people are salaried on the team. It's much more dynamic. So what we don't want to do on this webinar is come in and say, here's exactly how to run a team with very specific rules and regulations and best practices, because I don't think they exist. I think everything is really dynamic in this business. But I do think that really having a proper evaluation and having really great communication of, for the time being, what is my role? What is your role? What is everybody doing? How often are we coming together? Is what builds into that sort of the best practices of a team. And I think it might not be high trust with how we share information, but I do think that it is extremely important to have high trust over communication and what are the roles and responsibilities of every individual person. And so as you're on a team and you're thinking about, um, what does it look like? I think hopefully what you walk away from is a little bit of a mentality of, how are we thinking about our team? There's going to be a lot of teams where it's like, no, I don't want everybody knowing about all those different deals I'm working on, whatever, even though they're on my team. And so I think it goes back to in this business, and this is really built into our product, is there's a team and then there's partners within the team. And, we're partnering with one another, but we're not, but even though we might be on a team and it's really dynamic. So the managing of expectations is everything. And, when I got into the business, I worked with a senior broker who was servicing a lot of business for somebody else. And what that meant was I'd step into his office and say, hey, let's sit down for 30 minutes and review what I'm working on. And he'd get a phone call 2 minutes into it from, some more senior person that he was working with. And it was like, hey, I got to go. And I mean, this happened over and over and over. And I felt like I had no communication. I had no sort of organization and structure around this team. And that actually eventually broke up. And then I started working with somebody else and I was on sort of a different team, even though it was a fairly loose team. And so, like anything, really understanding that is really crucial. And I'll get into when we get into the product here, I'll walk through some of the things of why we built Anaya the way we built it to be the only product for really dynamic teams to run everything on. And so, but I do think it's worth spending a bit of time and feel free to ask any questions. By the way, I should have said this at the beginning. Feel free to type in any questions. We'll get to the Q&A. And Justin, stop me when those questions come in if you feel like they're relevant to sort of what we're talking about. Um, but I think we're team members, and this really evolves through the growth of an individual's brokerage career. I mean, even recently was chatting with a team where they were breaking, it was a couple people breaking up and it was ugly. And when I was talking with them, I was like, I think the challenge here with you guys is that you're all just being really impatient because you all have this great skill set where everybody, one person was like really the BD person, but he was young and he was probably impatient and maybe even greedy. And he wanted to start working with all these different other people because he had low trust in the senior broker. And that senior broker was saying, I don't understand why he's wanting to do all these other things. And it was one of those things where I was just saying, he's a bad junior. It's a bad junior when they are not thinking about the growing the pie as the team, building a brand as the team. And so what are the qualities of a bad junior and a bad senior within a team? I think is one of the most important conversations to have and self-evaluations within the business. And so as we were thinking through this, and I worked with a few different brokers on this, but I've seen it. I've even been that bad junior in my career at times, which was, you're just impatient. You start in this career, you're not making any money. Maybe your friends are in banking or something. You see them making money and you're like, gosh, how do I get on deal flow? And you're not thinking about it the right way because your role is probably the BD person. And the BD person is like trying to just jump straight onto deals as opposed to how do I build a pipeline? How do I think long term? How do I have a 3 to 4 year vision of how to get to that place where the deal flow is coming in? The team's really crushing it. This by far and away, and there's no one thing to point out with it, I think is the number one reason why junior brokers fizzle out and bounce from team to team. They're just impatient. They're oftentimes greedy. they're thinking that this is a career where it's just a fast track to success, and as we all know, it's really not. It's a career where you can count on one hand of the thousands of brokers I've interacted with who just kind of hit it really early on their own. I couldn't even count them on one hand, actually. And so I think every senior broker brings on a junior broker in hopes that they're not that sort of impatient, greedy, territorial type of junior broker who thinks they did more than they did, right? Like getting a meeting is an enormous success worth celebrating. But let's be honest, it's not you didn't win the deal, you didn't close the deal, and there's been no shortage of junior brokers in this business who got a meeting and then the deal closes and they're like, I want 50% of this thing. And they're not thinking through the fact that, this senior broker is really the one that like that transaction is probably not closing without that person. And maybe they were entitled to 50%, but the reality is maybe they weren't. And so um, the other major, uh, one of the other major, I think, bad junior traits is not understanding the business, that this is a sales business. And I've seen this over and over as well. This was less me, but but I've seen this on many occasions, which is I always say that in commercial real estate brokerage, you're not getting into commercial real estate. You're getting into the sales business, and you sort of earn the right to be a commercial real estate expert as your career evolves. And I think a lot of people get into this thinking, oh, I'm going to work at this commercial real estate company and I need to be an expert at knowing all of the different um, really knowing leases cold and knowing how to write the best proposals and knowing how cap tables, cap stacks work within a building and knowing all this kind of stuff. And I think a lot of that is just fluff for not wanting to get your hands dirty and get into sales. And I think if there's two sides of a coin, if you're a really great service provider or you're a really great salesperson, 9 times out of 10, everybody in this business is going to say, I'd rather have the really great salesperson. I'd rather have the person who's not afraid to pick up the phone, not afraid to get creative, not afraid to think about marketing strategies for how we can grow the team and really separate ourselves from the competition. Because from the outside looking in, everybody looks at brokers and thinks a broker is a broker is a broker. And that is not true at all. This is a business where there's real subject matter expertise, there's really market experience and transaction experience. And I always say that in this business, you learn 50% of everything you ever need to learn on your first deal. And some of that's just the process. Okay, we do this, then we do this, then we do this, then we do this. And then the second deal, you learn another 20%. So like, boom, you have 70% of everything you need to know on two different deals. And then everything going up to being the best broker in the world, making NFL money is just 1% at a time, a half a percent. And that's what really separates the sort of elite people. But the being knowledgeable about how to differentiate yourself, being knowledgeable about how to approach different companies based on their industry, based on how they're thinking about their business is something that comes with time. So if you're just not afraid to get your hands dirty, and if you look at a cold call not as a way to just close and get a meeting, but as actually as a way to deliver value, as a way to learn market information, and if you are nervous about sales, I think that's a bad quality of a junior broker. This is a funny business where, when you think about it, for many, many, many brokers, the vast majority of them, you start off your career selling what you don't really know how to do. And then you get good enough when you start getting deal flow, you get good enough where you actually just bring on a junior broker to do the BD for you. So right when you're good enough to really sell it well, you pass it on to somebody who doesn't know how to do it. And that's a cycle that's always worked in this business. And we'll get to bad seniors as well in a second who stop selling. But that is sort of a unique component of this business where when you think about any other professional services, you think about consulting, you think about law, you think about banking, those businesses have a totally flipped upside down model to commercial real estate brokerage, which is when you start off, you're paid this, nice salary, you've got this sort of cushy paycheck, but you're just doing the dirty work. That's all you're doing. And it's not sales. And then as you evolve and you become more senior, now you have to be the person that's selling. So once you make partner at some big company, or you're a partner at your law firm. Now you just pass on the dirty work to the junior people who can do a lot of the work, but you're now this sort of BD person. And so this is a business where like you learn the BD from day one more than you even learn anything else. And so your role as a younger person, not even younger, but as a newer person, newer to the business on the team is to be obsessed with business development, to be organized about business development, to be thinking about how to open up doors, to be engaging, to be thinking about, okay, let me get my senior broker's LinkedIn contacts. Do we know somebody at this company? Really, I would say bringing on a silver platter all of this knowledge and skill set around the sales process to then have the team make money. And so being impatient, not being committed to the sales nature of this business are what I think make a bad junior broker. And then with that comes just poor time management. Is a struggle, I think, of many, many brokers. It's a very low structure business. So how do you really manage your schedule to be focused on BD, not get super bogged down with deal flow so that your deal, so that you lose this sort of steady stream of deal flow. I think every broker's gone through the pain if they've made it pretty far where, hey, all of my deals closed at one time and now I have nothing. And so, as we're thinking about getting into 2026, you may be thinking that now, which is like I'm trying to close all these things and then my 2026 looks weak because you've not been able to figure out how to manage that. And that's the role of a team. The role of a team is that you never have those cyclical periods because everybody knows their role. And so I guess other bad, qualities, which are, kind of already been talked about a bit, are being disorganized. This is the role of technology. This is what we're trying to solve at Anaya, is to give you a centralized system that you can go to multiple times a day, even for no other reason than just to say, what am I missing? What do I have to do? And and then the last one is just not being committed. I think this is something that this is not a it's not a job per se. It's not a let me do it for 2 to 3 years, then you'll get an MBA. There are many people who have done that. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is in general, I would say, a lack of commitment to building a career in this business. Um, because an MBA in this career at the end of the day is probably nothing but maybe a way to differentiate yourself a bit optically, but it's not really a requirement in this business. And I think that's what makes this business so unique is it's really kind of raw entrepreneurship. It's your capacity to build more opportunities without credentials by just pure value add. And so we'll shift into the bad seniors, and I know many of them. And and I think the bad seniors, sort of those team leaders, the people who have gotten to a place in their career where they want to make more money, they want to leverage additional relationships, um, they want to build a bigger business, but they only want to build that for themselves. And and I think that is at the heart of what makes a bad senior is not thinking about how to grow the pie. I can I can count on probably two hands the number of senior brokers that I've made junior brokers as valuable as they are. And they've stuck together and they've built these incredibly strong teams where, a vice chairman created a vice chairman. It is very rare, but it happens. And when it happens, that's what the goal should be, that they've grown the pie that much more. There's a lot of synergy built into that, where we are all dividing and conquering and being extremely efficient about is this person a value add or are they just a tax on my deal flow? And so um, the number one quality I would say that I think you see in bad seniors is really that like not wanting to grow the pie is thinking through, hey, I'm bringing on these juniors and all their data is my data. All of their information is my information and not thinking about the business the right way. And we talked to a lot of these junior brokers who are on these teams. A lot of them use an eye and they're like, my senior's got this Salesforce. It's just like his platform. And everything that goes into that's just like this giant vacuum that, but I'm not making any money and I don't get any of his or her time. And there's just friction and it's not an impatient broker. It's actually a junior broker who's doing a healthy audit of whether, in this sea of a business where I can work with whoever I want, this person expects me to be sort of like this loyal slave. And so I think doing a healthy audit of, are you that type of a senior broker, and are you really thinking about how to grow the pie? Are you really leading? Is something that I think doesn't get discussed enough. And it's not just an impatient and greedy junior broker. And so having an honest evaluation of whether they're being greedy or whether you're being greedy is, I think, something that needs to happen. I think going back to the sales mentality of nervous about sales, you see it where people have succeeded begrudgingly because they hated the sales process. So they just want to bring on a junior broker who's going to do all the sales for them. And I think that is going back to bad seniors who are also um, thinking about themselves. They're actually nervous about the sales process. I had a senior broker in New York who was just a rock star. And, I was servicing a lot of his business. And, I remember asking one time, like, do you want me to be doing more BD? And he's like, you should always be doing BD. It's part of this business. It's the most valuable piece of this business. But he said, David, but I can get meetings you could never get. And then he was right. He had a deep Rolodex of relationships. He was just an absolute rock star. He's a great, great senior broker. He was great to learn from. Um, but he was voracious about business development. It just looked different. He had gone through the ringer of the sort of the cold calls, the sort of less relationship driven business development. He had advanced beyond that to where he had clients, he had deal flow, he had the connections. He sort of knew that there's a deal within the deal, and he was always leveraging the relationships with his clients to get new clients. And that's the model. That's the model. That is um, what a team should look like, where everybody is focused on business development and growing the pie. And one other quality I would say of a bad senior, and there's no shortage of this too, is because people hate the BD side of it sometimes. A lot of it has to do with it. They're just not good at closing. There's a lot of senior brokers who bring on junior brokers who probably shouldn't. They're just not the people that, if you get some enormous meeting to go pitch something and you've got to bring a senior broker who's not the right person, they can't close that business. It's too big even for them. That's a tough situation to be in. And so as we think about going back to the roles and responsibilities, maybe the team needs a more senior person. And so, having an honest evaluation of this, all of these things that are bad qualities in juniors are no different than what are bad qualities in seniors. It's really, are we committed to the team? Are we committed to how we share information? Are we committed to blocking off time to talk with one another? And and there's a way to do it as a junior, and there's a way to do it as a senior. And the way to do it as a senior, I think, is to be somebody who is scheduling off time with your team and really making sure that there's proper communication. And the way to do it as a junior is different. I think the way to do it as a junior is not to ask, how can I help? It's to actually go do things and say, look what I did. And one of my favorite stories was a guy that um, wound up building an unbelievable career with a senior who was sort of a legend. And he said he solidified himself on that team because he had heard that senior broker having a conversation with a client about something and all these things that needed to be done. And then he stayed in the office until 10 or 11 at night because he knew there was like a big pitch coming up. He just heard it. And he said, hey, I heard you talking about that. So I went ahead and did X, Y, and Z. I put these comps together. I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. Didn't ask to do it. He just did it. And that person said, you're with me on everything from now on. And I have another story of a girl that is also working with this sort of iconic broker and somehow was invited into a meeting. And, the sort of top dog broker was not the most organized person. It's a chaotic business. And it was just very organized. And she went in and said, hey, by the way, I took the minutes of the meeting. I wrote it all down. This is pre-AI. I took the minutes of the meeting. You've got to do this, you've got to do this, you've got to do this, but I took care of this and this and this for you. And that person then said, you're with me on everything. And so those teams, the teams kind of got formed just through, call it junior broker value add, and the senior broker being in position being in situations where that work was really valuable. And so, I think sometimes these teams are formed and they sort of stick together without the real configuration of where value is created and what the systems of communication should be. And so I would say bad seniors are also just they're too busy working on their own deal flow that they're not servicing their team. They're not communicating, they're not talking. And and that's a struggle for any group of people working together. But the most important thing is, if you're a junior, are you just adding value and finding out ways to do it without asking the question of how can I help you? That should be self-evident in a business with as little structure of how to add value. In some ways, I think you either have it or you don't in this business. But the greed, the lack of time management, the lack of communication and organization, I think, is pervasive. And so you build a team to sort of manage those things as opposed to anything else. And so, what are best practices before we sort of dive into the product and get to sort of how Anaya can help you run the best occupier and even landlord rep team? Um, Number one, do we have regular meetings? Is there blocked off times where we're saying we just need to be talking, where there's a structure in place, there's, probably an agenda, there's some sort of routine process that we run through, just because as soon as we leave this, everybody goes their own way, everybody's running around, everybody's going on tours and is out of the office a lot of the times. And so how do we have that sort of ironclad commitment, 7:30 a.m. every Monday, whatever it is? Does your team do that? And if not, why not? And is there a proper evaluation of the roles of everybody on the team? Is there some sort of reevaluation of everybody's role where we're saying, hey, our 2020, let's all be committed that in 2026, this is your role, this is my role, this is what we do, so that there's not the chaos that gets lost without that communication. And then the third bit is being honest about, like, is there trust? And it doesn't mean do we trust everybody and, with all the information all the time, but I think having an honest assessment of where we can build trust. Again, this is a low trust business in many ways. Every broker's got, there's a lot of reasons for that. The incentive structure of the business has generally created it. But in all of that communication of those meetings should be focused on what are the KPIs of our team? What are the things that we do? We don't close the laptop on Friday until these things are met every week, every month, every quarter, and every year. Getting really strong in that evaluation is, we'll show you some of that stuff in Anaya, but is really how you build a team that advances. This is not a complex business, but building a team is really complex. And so it is kind of creating organization out of chaos, and it's creating structure where there's not a lot of structure. And I think when it's done well, it's impossible to stop. I think you see that in this business of everybody knows and they're on market a team, and maybe you're on one where you think about that team as being on every potential transaction that's large in your marketplace. And then the third bit, which we'll get into, is just the technology. What are we, where I think every industry, and this is why we built Anaya, every industry, it seemed like, but this industry has benefited from collaboration software and ways we can always kind of know what's going on. Whereas somehow in this business, that's just almost never existed. It's I'm using this Excel file, John's using that Salesforce, so and so's using that, and and it winds up creating so much friction and so much lack of communication it's almost impossible to build a team. And if I felt like there was, a bunch of CRMs in this space that were worth their salt, I would have never launched Anaya, but I felt like this is a business where there's some unique peculiarities that need to be captured in the product to really have product market fit. And and so we'll get into that, but I'll dive into the product and explain sort of how our team feature works. And as you know, if you're using Anaya, it's actually a feature. Like, Anaya is not built to be a team product alone. It's something where for those brokers who are on a team where there's a little bit more trust and they want to share information, this is for you. But if you want to use Anaya totally by yourself and be a lone wolf, like we wanted to build that for you as well. And so the dynamic ways in which people partner is, at CBRE, they always called it managed brokerage. And what that meant was, you put the right group of people on the deal, and maybe one time you insert somebody else, and maybe you insert somebody else here and there. Um, and I always joke that there's nothing managed about it. It's just brokerage. That's just how brokers work. You want to bring the right people that are going to help win the deal. And how do you do that within the confines of a team? And so, Justin, are there any questions before I move on to the product?
Nothing we need to interrupt with right now, so I'd say keep rolling and we'll jump into a few at the end.
Cool. All right. So you can see here, this is my Anaya account, and I'm going to focus on just Occupier Rep. So I'll sort of just come into my prospects and actually just focus on these Occupier Rep pursuits. These are all the different companies I'm going after. What makes Anaya different than any other technology out there, as far as I can tell, is the way in which people partner in Anaya. So if you're on a high trust team, every one of these prospects is likely to have the same number of team members. So I can just come in and invite, Justin into this and go ahead and add him as a team member and go ahead and click save. And now Justin's on this as well. And if you're a high trust team, everybody's on everything. But if you're maybe a low trust team or a large team, and large doesn't mean low trust, but large does mean there might be some silos within that team of, hey, I mostly work with Justin and Danny, and we're on all of these things. So we built this Teams feature, which if I click into it, has a sort of universal kind of message board where I can communicate with one another. I can message the whole team. We can see sort of everybody that's adding sort of the new prospects or new clients to the team. There's an analytics screen of the leases we have out, the closed deals we have out, the business development activity of who's doing the most BD, who's getting the most meetings. So we have here BD across the sales activities that are being logged in Anaya, the phone calls, the emails, etc. Who's booking the most meetings? And then are our meetings going up or down over time? So as deal flow is going up, we're seeing meetings going down. Not a good thing. We don't want to see that. And then we have all of the leases that are out across the entire team. Um, and some of these I might not be on. Some of these are just, this is how the team in Anaya is the centralized dashboard so that when everybody's in their prospects and in their deals, they're choosing to share that information with the team because there's high trust. And so if I were to come in and let's say we want to create a prospect and I'm choosing to share it with my New York City tenant rep team, or maybe I'm on a practice group across the country, I could also share it with that. You can create multiple teams in Anaya. But I wanted to go after, let's just say, OpenAI. And I'm sure I've created that before. And I can put in the critical information. I can grab who the sort of key decision makers are here. And then I'm saying who my partners are. So if you're on a high trust team, it's likely that everybody is going to be on this, and that's fine. They'll be on everything. But if you're on a large team where there are those silos, I could say, hey, actually, I mostly work with Tara and Justin on this, and there's some other people going after other things. So I'm creating this, and here we go. There's OpenAI, but I can log into my team and see what everybody else has added. I can go to all the companies we're going after, and I can see exactly what I'm going after. So but I'm not on Johnson Law Group. I'm not on Smart Technologies. So this is how, when I've spoken with just almost every major team, I feel like where people are complaining, like, why is everybody using their own spreadsheet, their own information? And it's generally because one, probably just lack of good workflow, but two, it's so that when I click into my prospects, these are just the prospects I'm on. I only care about the information that's going to actually make me money. But how do I then share that information to the team? That's how you do it, by coming in, clicking this, and opening up any one of these prospects, and then actually choosing to share it with the team. So I can come into this and say, I want to actually share this with the team. And and so we think of teams a little bit like the Goldilocks effect of you're not sharing too much, you're not sharing too little. There's high trust where I can still call you and say, hey, what's going on with that? But when I click into that team, whoops, when I click into that team, what's going on here? There we go. When I click into the team, I can see everything we're going after. And so let's say, there is some company in here, Manchester United. Let's just use them. So I can see here, this person's going after that. I'm not on it. So when I go to create a prospect for that company, I'm going to be told, oops, there we go. I'm going to be told, hey, somebody on the team's already going after that. So there's a bit of dividing and conquering. I can request to be made a partner on that. If I want to actually, if I feel like I should be on that, but there is this central repository where we can log in and have really great KPI meetings. We can come in, go to the analytics screen. So most of the teams we talk with, this is what they do. They come down here, we run through the sales activities. Let's say I wanted to just see, you know, um, November of 2025. I've done 22 outreaches. Justin's done 4. What about meetings scheduled? Let's go to, this month. There we go. I've booked 3 meetings. Justin's booked 1. So there we go. There's those 4 meetings for this month. And then we come through, how are the deals, like what's going on with the deals we're working on? We can see how much we have in sort of total commission, what the total size is of those deals. And then our teams typically run through this right here, which is all the tracked accounts. And I could say, we could break this down and say, let's start with high priority. And, Ross, here we go. Start with yours. Or we could just, depending on how much information is in the system, we could just say, let's just start with high priority across the whole team and, run through sort of everything. But this is really the way to have an efficient meeting. There we go. The way to have an efficient meeting where we can say, let's start with high priority, run one by one through everything. All right, let's move to who we've had meetings with. Let's run through these. Let's move through active pursuits. Let's run through these. And you just get this up on a screen and you're running through everything. I need help with this. I need help with this. I think, I actually know somebody at that company. That type of sharing information is really why that monthly, weekly, I would say the more often you do it, the better meeting is so vital if you're trying to build a really dynamic team that divides and conquers, is a wolf pack. And so hopefully that's helpful for thinking through it. It's worth mentioning every team you have to invite the people into. And so when you first create an Anaya account, you're not yet on a team. And so you actually create one, give it a name, call it whatever you want, invite the people into it. And so invite people, go ahead and click save, call it, team all-star, whatever you want to call it, team occupier rep Seattle, whatever you want to call it. And now start sharing information with those teams. So you get to go about your daily workflow, focus on the things you're responsible for while just choosing to share select information with that team. So hopefully that's helpful for one, just how to use Anaya, but also whether or not you think, hey, either I'm not taking advantage of that feature, but also just thinking through the overall challenges of building a team so that you can grow market share. Because at the end of the day, that's what this business is really all about. I guess before I dive into some of the future stuff we're working on, I think in the nearly 20 years I've been doing this, which is crazy to say, I think there was a day and age in this business where being a bit of a lone wolf was somewhat possible, even sort of 1 or 2 people. But as you think about how large some companies have become, and if you just think about the types of, what do clients want to hire? They want to hire a reliable team that can service all the various components of the business with the appropriate bandwidth so that if one person's out, they don't have to wait for your out of office to be turned off. And so how do you divide and conquer? How do you really grow market share? Because the thing that people don't talk about enough, I think, in this business is that even the business in some ways, people talk about, you know, how I'm just maybe a realist about this, but in any market, there's only so many large deals. And so in some capacity, I'd rather be on 15% of an enormous deal than 0% of not winning it. And so the whole purpose of teams is to be able to capture all of that, is to be able to go to any pitch and say, we know about everything. We have tentacles into everything. We see more deal flow than anybody else. And so as you think about whether you should be on a team, as you think about how to divide and conquer, to grow the pie, to have a little bit more safety and assurance, and really how to become the highest producer you can be, it really is through, I think, the network effect of this business and leveraging other people where you're weak and building a really synergistic team of people that you trust. And it is rare. I think it's really rare in this business to see that happen. But when it happens, it's really unstoppable. And um, so I'll open it up for Q&A before we about anything team oriented, before we kind of show you some of the stuff we're working on around Occupier Rep. But Justin, any questions that we should be addressing?
Actually, the questions that are coming in have more to do with upcoming features of the product. So it segues nicely if you want to keep rolling through.
Cool. All right. So we're actually getting some really exciting stuff that is, I think, going to be a game changer for how you not just win business, how you pitch business, but also how you manage client relationships. And we've spent the vast majority of Anaya's life building workflows. And the powerful thing about workflows is that if they're done really well, they open up all these doors. And, I think about the archaic nature of this business of, I've got to, you know, go create a tour book. I've got to go and, put this report together. I've got to run a financial analysis. We're getting to a place where some of the stuff we're working on, we're kind of in a place now where we can actually show some of this to you. I will caveat it with you're the first people to ever see this. Um, but let's say I'm representing OpenAI for some national account work. And so here we go. Here's my OpenAI deal, and I can log the tours and I can, click negotiation progress and actually, here's the various properties I'm negotiating with. And we can drag and drop these LOIs and have the AI generate these financial analyses so that we can then create these client deliverables. Again, this would be your logo, and here's the financial analysis of these transactions, and here's the sort of this is I should caveat this too. I have bad data in here, but this is not what transaction data will typically look like. But we're seeing these net effective rents go down, and here's the cash flow analyses. So we're making this something that takes seconds and doesn't require you to wait on company analysts or put together some janky Excel model. But now, and we're not too far off from it, although there's still a good amount of work to be done here. What you're going to be able to do, and I'll go to a test server to show this. Where is it at? Um, hold on. It is, oh, bookmarks, view, show bookmarks. Here we go. So this is a test server account where I just have one client. And so I've got one client, Acme Corporation, and this is an occupier client. So they lease these various buildings. And if I click into, New York City, they lease 15,000 feet there. And what you're going to see is client portal. And so this is where you can actually, and definitely don't judge this UI, but this is where you can invite your clients to essentially have an application for themselves to manage all of their real estate. And you're going to be able to see what they see to where, again, don't judge any of this UI. I'm going to say that 10 times, but this is their portfolio. And so if I want to see everything they lease or own, see all of the transactions we're working on for them, see all of their square footage by whether they own it or lease it, what the property type is, the lease expiration dates, which you can see down here of sort of when their leases are coming up, what their portfolio really looks like. You can see a list view of all the stuff they lease or own, when leases are coming up. This will have all the reminders that then remind them of their own lease expiration dates being sent from your email address. And then click into the transactions to where now for this one specific transaction, here's the requirement that we've defined. Here's the, move-in date. They want to be in, Tribeca, and, go ahead and put that sub-market there, whatever the sort of various sub-markets they may want to be in. They want, a fitness center. They want outdoor storage space. They want, X amount of dock high doors, sort of anything that might be meaningful. Then we move into the once we move into the survey stage, which is just being done from you managing the deal now and saying, here's the various options we're going to be looking at for you. Here's the various options. We can see a list view of this stuff and we can see, hey, here's 195 Broadway. They haven't said they like this or dislike this yet. They can click into that. They can see, kind of what the building looks like. This will all be much better, but they can walk the street. They can, see the space plans. They can see all the sort of core digital tour, the sort of visuals that you put in here. And they can sort of say, hey, they like this or they don't like this, whatever it is. Then the tours that you create in Anaya are all now visible for them as well. We can see a map view of this. Here's tour number one. Here's tour number two. We can click into the proposals we're negotiating and really cross compare these to see sort of what these look like apples to apples. This could be 5 or 6 and they can evaluate these options, say which ones they like. Here's all the stuff that we've done that gets automatically sort of so they know what you're updating them on, and then move to the leases section where we'll have a really good AI review of, this turn of the lease and this turn of the lease. Here's what's still open for negotiation. And so this will be really badass looking. This will be not as ugly as it is now. It will have we're working with really incredible UI designers on this stuff, so that when you go to a pitch, you can say, the way we're thinking about this feature is that it can start off with maybe you have like low trust with the client and there's, we just hustled some space and they want to see something. You can create the tour and say, hey, here you go. Here are the options. What do you think? By the way, if you have any other locations, we can get this in the system. This will give you all the critical dates of when your leases are coming up. This will give you all the sort of information, critical dates of your renewals and, right of first offers and terminations and all that type of stuff to take some of that weight off of you. But this will all be white labeled with your logo so that you will effectively be able to not just say, hey, we can be your sort of, free of charge real estate arm, but to actually then give them software to manage all of that has a domain they can invite team members into, they can password protect it, and they're now operating on your software as the occupier rep broker, so that you can go from a one-off transaction much more immediately into pitching this idea that you should be retaining me to do all of your work across the country and the globe and whatever. And so as always, you'll still be able to partner with loan brokers in those different markets to also contribute to that information. But we're really excited about this. If you want to schedule time, we want your feedback on this because we have, still an enormous amount of software to write for this feature, but it is going to be a game changer, I think, with how you service your clients and how you don't have to update 2 different things. You're just managing your own workflow. You're having the AI run all the financial analysis. You're taking in the tours as they go back and forth. And just that's just updating the clients. They've got a centralized dashboard for the tours, for the surveys, for the transaction management, for the closed deals, which then will update their existing locations. And so they're going to be able to store all of their leases in there. They're going to be able to store all that information on your software. So I will end that there. But I would love to schedule time with anybody that wants to see this to really understand it. And also, if you're interested in being an early adopter of it, when we get this thing ready to ship, we always want to try and put really big, huge features. We call it feature flagging into your hands first. And so feel free to email me or Justin if you'd like to be on that list, because I do think that when this is all said and done, and I apologize, I'm showing you the most ghetto version of it. I think this is going to be a huge value proposition for as you pitch companies, whether they have one location or whether they have 1,000. And so let us know if you have any questions. And Justin, what were those questions?
Yeah, there were a number of questions about the when and how or if we can get early access. So I'm going to put our email addresses in the chat. You can email either myself or David, and we'd be happy to follow up with you and kind of get you on the list when we're ready to start testing things. So I know that we're short on time. Other questions, like I said, you can email either of us. We will be sending out the recording to this webinar. And thank you all for joining us. I know there was a lot of interest in the topic. So, David, I'll leave it to you to close out.
Yeah, I think, we're going into the holiday season. It's a busy time for everybody. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for being an Anaya user if you are. If you're interested in getting a demo, I know we have quite a few people that are either in trial or haven't created a trial account yet. Happy to give you a personal demo myself. Um, and we're just continuing to build this technology for you. So let us know how we can be helpful for you. And our whole mission is just making brokers the center of the commercial real estate world, which, as we all know, you are. It's just not been on software yet. And so um, let us know how we can help. We want your feedback, and we're just building this for you. So I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving. If we don't catch up, have a great holiday season. Really excited for 2026, and we'll be in touch. Thanks, guys.